In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 top tips from psychology about how you can study more effectively. So the first piece of advice I would give you in studying more effectively is to avoid making intuitive judgments about how much you know. And the reason for this is really simple. These kind of intuitive judgments are often completely wrong. Let me give you a common scenario. Students often try and study by repeatedly rereading their sources over and over again. And of course, with every repetition, that source will start to feel a bit more familiar. But the problem is, this familiarity is going to be contingent upon that source being present for your reference, which of course it's not going to be when you have to recall that information in contexts like an examination, for example. So the way you avoid falling foul of this trap is to incorporate the process of kind of testing yourself on the material in your reading and note-taking. So you can use what we call the 3R approach. And all this means is you read a short passage of text, you put the source to one side so you can't see it, and then you try and recall the key points of that passage of text in your own words. Of course, what you can then do is compare your recall of the source information to the source itself for factual accuracy. And you can repeat this process until you remember the material accurately and your recall of the material is good enough to warrant you moving on to the next passage of text. If you do this, it will stop you getting erroneous ideas about how much you can recall from any given piece of source material. The second piece of advice I'd give you about studying more effectively is to think about what makes you procrastinate. And the reason I say this is because you're probably busy making things like study timetables for yourself. And these are all well and good, but a timetable of studying is only really a statement of intentions. And intentions only amount to something if you see your intentions through and take action on those intentions. And procrastination is, of course, the number one enemy, the thing that gets in the way of seeing through your intentions and turning them into actions. Now, one of the reasons students often procrastinate, particularly when it comes to things like, studying or writing essays, is that they underestimate the amount of time that activity is going to take. Of course, if you think you can get something done quickly, then there's very little impetus for you not to put it off until the last minute. However, if you take a big task like writing an essay and you break it down into its subcomponents, suddenly there's a lot more impetus for you to get cracking because the process of breaking a big task down into its subcomponents means you get a much better idea of how big that task actually is. And if you do this, you're much less likely to put off doing that task because, well, you can see what it entails and you can see that it can't be done overnight. The third piece of advice I'd give you on studying more effectively is to avoid reading aimlessly. Now, what I mean by that is that sometimes when you're studying, you can be given so many sources that it just seems overwhelming. And the point almost appears to be, well, I've got to read as much of this material as I can, as quickly as I can. But learning really isn't a reading contest. It's not how much you read that counts. It's how much you can take from what you do read that matters a lot more. Now, if you begin the process of reading and your purpose is just, well, my tutor told me to read this, that's what I'm going to do, then you haven't thought of any questions you'd like the text to answer. And of course, if you don't have any questions, the text can't provide you with any answers. Now, what you need to do to get more from the reading you do is think about some questions that you'd like a particular source to answer before you start reading it. And then as you're reading that text, start to interact or interrogate that text with those questions. So you can ask things like, okay, well, this text just made an assertion here. Where's the evidence to back up that assertion? This process is what we call elaborative interrogation, and it really helps you to get an awful lot more from the process of reading, and also helps you get out of that mindset that the process of learning is really nothing more than a glorified reading contest. Remember, it's not how much you read, it's what you take from the reading that counts. The fourth piece of advice I'd give you on studying more effectively is that your memory doesn't work like a camera, so don't study as if it did. Now, what I mean by that is many students seem to fall into the trap of thinking that the end goal of studying is to be able to reproduce someone else's understanding of a topic. But that's really not the point at all, and it doesn't take advantage of the way your memory works. Your memory isn't reproductive in nature, it's reconstructive, which means it's fundamentally affected by things like your existing knowledge and expectations. So what you should really be asking yourself when you're reading information or have your sources in front of you is, how does this information fit in with what I already know? How does it fit in with my expectations? And above all else, how would I explain this information in my own words to someone who'd yet to do the studying for this particular topic? If you take this approach, you're taking advantage of how your memory works, i.e. its reconstructive nature. And you'll find this is a much more effective approach to learning than trying to reproduce someone else's understanding of a topic. The fifth piece of advice I'd give you on studying more effectively is to ensure that whenever you set a piece of work as an assessment, the first thing that you do is retrieve the marking and grading criteria for that particular assessment type. And the reason for this is simple. Research has shown that expectations for a particular type of assessment can often be very different between students and tutors. And of course, if you produce a piece of work that meet your own expectations but don't meet the tutor's expectations, there's a very good chance you're going to fail or get a much poorer mark than you'd want. So the way around this is to always have the marking and grading criteria for a piece of work available to you from the outset of the production of that piece of work. And if there are any elements of the marking and grading criteria that you don't understand or that you're not sure how you will achieve in the composition of your work, make sure you go and see a tutor sooner rather than later. Don't guess at what the expectations are for a particular piece of assessment, because if you get it wrong, it can have a significant effect on the marks that you receive for your efforts. I hope you found these tips useful, and I wish you all the very best in your studies. If you enjoyed this content, please do subscribe to my channel and turn the notifications on so you know when I produce further content on how to study effectively.